In the mists of a Scottish dawn, massive stones rise from the earth like frozen giants. Their shadows stretch across the heather. These are the standing stones of Callanish, older than the pyramids of Egypt. Local legends whisper that these megaliths were once living beings, giants turned to stone by the first light of a forgotten sun. Across the North Sea in Norway, a peculiar rock formation towers above the fjord. 7 sisters, they call them, 7 trolls who danced too close to dawn. The morning sun caught them celebrating and transformed their massive bodies into the peaks we see today. Every crag and crevice tells their story, frozen in their final moment of joy. From Ireland's Giant's Causeway to Sweden's ancient burial mounds, Europe's landscape is marked by monuments that defy explanation. Who moved these colossal stones? What force could lift blocks weighing hundreds of tons and arrange them with astronomical precision? Modern archaeology offers theories about Neolithic builders, but ancient peoples had their own answers. They spoke of trolls and giants, the first inhabitants of these lands. Beings of immense strength who shaped mountains, carved valleys, and raised stone circles as easily as children build with pebbles. These were not mere fairy tales told around fires. They were explanations for a landscape that seemed too monumental, too deliberate, to be natural. Tonight, we journey into the heart of these ancient beliefs. We'll walk among the stone guardians of Northern Europe, where trolls still lurk in mountain shadows. We'll stand before Celtic megaliths, where giants once strode across the land before the coming of men. This is the story of how our ancestors understood their world, through beings of stone and earth, mountain and mist. The stones remember, even if we have forgotten, and in their silence, they still speak of those who came before. If you're ready to look beyond the veil of forgotten myths and uncover the secrets the world chose to forget, subscribe to Inside Strange Times, so you won't miss new journeys into the realm of ancient mysteries. The mountains of Norway hold secrets older than memory. In the 13th century, Snorri Sturluson recorded stories that had been passed down for countless generations. His prose Edda speaks of the Jötnar, the ancient giants who existed before gods walked the earth. These were not mere monsters in children's tales, but fundamental forces of the cosmos itself. According to the Voluspa, the world began in Ginnungagap, the yawning void between fire and ice. When these primordial forces met, they created Ymir, the first of all giants. His body was so vast that entire worlds would later be carved from his flesh. The gods themselves, led by Odin and his brothers, slew Ymir and used his corpse to build Midgard. His bones became mountains. His teeth became rocks and boulders. His blood formed the seas. This is why trolls and giants have such affinity for stone. they are returning to their primordial essence. The word troll itself carries ancient weight. In Old Norse, troll could mean giant, witch, or any supernatural being of great power. The Icelandic sagas use the term for beings that dwelt in mountains and rocky places far from human settlements. These creatures were not uniformly evil, though they were dangerous. They represented the untamed wilderness, the places where human law held no sway. In the saga of Grettir the Strong, written in the 14th century, we encounter detailed descriptions of troll encounters. Grettir faces the troll woman Glamour, whose strength rivals his own legendary might. She dwells in a cave behind a waterfall, a liminal space between worlds. The saga describes her as massive and hideous, with claws like iron and skin like stone. But it also notes her ancient wisdom, her knowledge of spells and curses that predate human memory. The Norwegian landscape itself tells the story of trolls turned to stone. In Trondheim stands the Trollholmen rock formation, 7 massive pillars rising from the sea. Local tradition dating back to medieval times claims these were a troll wedding party. They celebrated through the night, forgetting the approach of dawn. When the first rays of sunlight touched them, they transformed instantly into the stones we see today. Fishermen still avoid the area at certain times, claiming to hear music echoing from the rocks on winter nights. Archaeological excavations in Norway have uncovered curious patterns. Bronze Age rock carvings often depict enormous humanoid figures beside normal-sized humans. At Alta, in Finnmark, carvings dated to 4,200 BCE show giants wielding massive clubs. These beings tower over hunting scenes, suggesting they were seen as different from ordinary humans. Some archaeologists interpret these as gods or ancestors, but local traditions have always called them trolls. The medieval Icelandic manuscript Landnámabók, the Book of Settlements, records numerous encounters with trolls during Iceland's colonization. Settlers arriving in the 9th and 10th centuries found an island that seemed inhabited by supernatural beings. The chronicle mentions Barður Snæfellsas, a half-giant, half-troll who lived in the Snæfellsnes Glacier. He stood 12 ells tall, roughly 18 feet, and could stride across valleys in single steps. When Christianity came to Iceland, Barður retreated into the glacier itself, becoming one with the mountain. Locals claim to see his massive form moving within the ice during storms. Swedish traditions speak of the Bergsro, the mountain troll who rules over mineral wealth. Miners in medieval Sweden left offerings before entering new shafts. They knew that trolls controlled the veins of silver and iron within the earth. The Stora Kopparberg mine in Dalarna, operational since the 10th century, has documented traditions of appeasing the mountain trolls. Miners reported hearing massive footsteps in abandoned tunnels and finding perfectly round stones that trolls had shaped as warnings. The connection between trolls and stoneworking appears throughout Scandinavian folklore. In Denmark, The Troll Church near Hevidovre consists of massive boulders arranged in a rough circle. Legend says trolls built it in a single night, trying to create their own place of worship. When they heard the church bells at dawn, they fled, leaving their work unfinished. Similar stories attach to stone bridges across Scandinavia. The Trollhätte Bridge in Sweden was supposedly built by a troll who demanded the first soul to cross. Clever villagers sent a rooster across first, cheating the troll of his payment. Regional variations in troll mythology reveal deeper patterns. Norwegian trolls tend to be solitary mountain dwellers, massive and ancient. They turn to stone in sunlight because they belong to the age before the sun, when darkness covered the earth. Swedish trolls often appear in family groups, living in hills that glow with supernatural light. They're known for switching human children with changelings, suggesting anxiety about bloodline and inheritance. Icelandic trolls blend with the volcanic landscape, emerging from lava fields and hot springs. They embody the island's violent geological forces, the constant tension between creation and destruction. The Jotnar of the Eddas were not merely enemies of the gods, but necessary counterparts. The god Thor's mother was the giantess Jorð, the earth herself. Odin sought wisdom from the giant Mimir and traded his eye for knowledge at the giant's well. The gods knew that at Ragnarok, the giants would return to reclaim the world. Fire giants, led by Surtur, would burn the world tree, while frost giants would march from the north. This wasn't simple destruction, but cosmic renewal, the world returning to its primordial state. Medieval church records reveal how seriously Christians took the threat of trolls. The Norwegian Borgarthing law from the 12th century prescribed penalties for those who sit out to awake trolls. Bishop Guðmundur Arason of Iceland, in the 13th century, performed exorcisms at sites believed to be troll dwellings. He blessed the mountain Drangi, driving out trolls who had been attacking travelers. Church chronicles record that after the blessing, rock slides ceased and the path became safe. This suggests that natural phenomena were interpreted through the lens of troll activity. The Havamal, a collection of Old Norse poems, warns travelers about trolls in mountain passes. It advises carrying iron, which trolls cannot abide, and never traveling alone after sunset. The poem describes trolls as ancient and evil, beings who remember the world before human civilization. They resent human intrusion into their domains, the wild places that were theirs since the beginning. Yet the same poem notes that trolls possess giant wisdom, knowledge that even Odin himself sought. Stone formations across Scandinavia bear names that reflect troll mythology. The Trollveggen in Norway, the Troll Wall, is Europe's tallest vertical rock face. Climbers report strange acoustic phenomena, voices that seem to come from within the stone itself. The Trolltunga, Troll's tongue, juts out from a mountain like a massive petrified organ. Local tradition says a troll was boasting of his strength, sticking out his tongue at the gods. Lightning struck him, turning him to stone as an eternal warning against hubris. Archaeological evidence suggests these stories might preserve ancient memories. Many Scandinavian stone circles and burial mounds date to the Bronze Age, long before written records. The people who built these monuments left no explanation for their purpose. Later, inhabitants, finding these massive constructions, attributed them to giants and trolls. The Anundshug burial mound in Sweden, standing over 9 meters high, was said to be a troll king's home. Excavations revealed it was built around 500 CE, but locals maintained troll traditions into modern times. The medieval Konungs Skuggja, the King's Mirror, written around 1250, discusses trolls as natural phenomena. The author, likely a Norwegian cleric, attempts to rationalize troll sightings. He suggests they might be illusions caused by mountain mists or demons taking physical form. Yet he doesn't dismiss them entirely, noting that too many reliable witnesses have encountered trolls. The text describes trolls as being made of earth and stone, animated by ancient magic. When this animation fails, they return to their natural state as rock formations. Runic inscriptions occasionally reference trolls and giants. The Roke runestone in Sweden, carved around 800 CE, mentions giants' paths. Scholars debate whether this refers to actual roads built by giants or metaphorical paths to the other world. The Glavendrup stone in Denmark warns that anyone who damages the monument will become a rete, possibly meaning they'll be cursed to wander as a troll. These inscriptions show that belief in trolls was serious enough to invoke in protective curses. The transformation of trolls from cosmic forces to folklore creatures happened gradually. In the Eddas, giants are near equals to gods, shaping the cosmos through their conflicts. By the medieval sagas, trolls have become more localized threats, dangerous but manageable. Christian influence reduced them further, from embodiments of chaos to demons or illusions. Yet they never fully disappeared from Scandinavian consciousness. They retreated to the margins, to mountains and forests, waiting in stone form for their time to return. The giants of Scandinavian mythology did not emerge in isolation. Across the Indo-European world, from Ireland to India, stories of primordial giants shape creation myths. These parallels run too deep to be coincidental. They point to shared memories from the Bronze Age, when Indo-European peoples spread across Eurasia. Linguists have reconstructed the Proto-Indo-European word for giant as something like Gyans or Guayants. This root appears in Sanskrit as giant, in Greek as gigas, and in Germanic languages as Jotun. The consistency suggests these peoples carried giant myths from their common homeland, probably the Pontic steppes. These weren't borrowed tales, but fundamental cosmological concepts. The Rig Veda, composed around 1500 BCE, speaks of the Daityas and Danavas, giant races who preceded the gods. Like the Norse Jotnar, they weren't simply evil, but represented primordial forces. The giant Vritra enclosed all the world's waters within his mountainous body. The god Indra had to slay him to release the rivers, creating the landscape we know. This pattern, gods killing giants to create the ordered world, appears across Indo-European mythology. Greek mythology preserves multiple giant traditions that parallel Nordic beliefs. The Titans, led by Kronos, ruled before the Olympian gods. They were beings of enormous size and strength, associated with natural forces. Atlas held up the sky. Prometheus shaped humans from clay. Oceanus embodied the world-encircling river. When Zeus led the younger gods in revolt, the resulting Titanomachy shook the cosmos. The defeated Titans were imprisoned in Tartarus, deep within the earth. But Greeks also knew the Gigantes, a separate race of giants born from Earth's blood. The Gigantomachy, their war against Olympus, required both gods and heroes to win. These giants had serpent legs, connecting them to the chthonic earth. When defeated, they were buried under mountains and volcanoes. Mount Etna supposedly imprisons the giant Enceladus, whose writhing causes eruptions. This matches Norse beliefs about giants trapped in mountains, their movements causing earthquakes. Archaeological evidence supports deep-rooted giant beliefs across Europe. The megalithic traditions that flourished from 4,500 to 1,500 BCE left monuments from Portugal to Scandinavia. Dolmens, standing stones, and passage graves required moving blocks weighing up to 300 tons. Modern experiments show these could be moved by humans with enough time and labor. But ancient peoples, finding these monuments already old, attributed them to giants. The Carnac stones in Brittany, over 3,000 standing stones erected around 3,300 BCE, generated extensive giant mythology. Local tradition claims they're a Roman legion turned to stone by Merlin. But older stories speak of giants who used them as a calendar, reading seasons in shadow patterns. Similar traditions surround Stonehenge, which Geoffrey of Monmouth claimed giants brought from Africa. He wrote that Merlin moved them from Ireland using gear, possibly preserving memory of actual engineering techniques. Celtic mythology provides a bridge between Mediterranean and Nordic giant traditions. The Fomorians of Irish myth were primordial giants who emerged from chaos. They had various deformities, single eyes or arms representing cosmic disorder. The Tuatha De Danann, the godlike people who civilized Ireland, had to defeat them at the Battle of Mag Tuaird. This battle parallels both the Titanomachy and Ragnarok, order triumphing over chaos. The Book of Invasions, compiled in the 11th century from older sources, lists several giant races in Ireland. The Fir Bolg, the men of bags, were giants who carried soil in bags to create fertile land. Partholon's people were giants who cleared plains and created lakes. Each wave of giants prepared Ireland for human habitation, then died or departed. These stories might preserve memories of actual prehistoric populations transformed through oral tradition. Roman writers recorded Germanic beliefs about giants before Christian influence. Tacitus in his Germania mentions that Germans believed in an earth-born god Twisto, whose name might mean twin or hermaphrodite. This primal giant gave birth to Manus, the ancestor of all Germanic peoples. The pattern matches Ymir in Norse mythology, a primordial giant whose body becomes the world. This suggests these myths were already ancient when Tacitus wrote in 98 CE. Archaeological discoveries continually reveal the depth of giant mythology. The Goseck Circle in Germany, built around 4,900 BCE, aligns with astronomical events. Local folklore claimed giants built it to track the movements of the sky. The Nebra sky disk, from 1,600 BCE, was found near sites associated with giant legends. These connections suggest prehistoric Europeans linked monumental architecture with giant builders. Burial practices provide another connection to giant beliefs. Many European cultures practiced excarnation, exposing bodies before burial. Bones were then arranged in communal tombs, sometimes sorted by type. Finding these collections of large bones, especially if mineralized, later peoples might assume they belonged to giants. The Greek word titan might derive from titanos, meaning white earth or gypsum, possibly referring to white bones. Indo-European cultures shared specific beliefs about giants and stone. Giants could shape stone with their hands, leaving fingerprints in solid rock. They could throw boulders vast distances, explaining erratic stones left by glaciers. They turned to stone in sunlight, or when cursed, or when their animating force departed. These consistent themes suggest shared origin rather than convergent evolution. The megalithic tomb at Newgrange in Ireland, built around 3,200 BCE, demonstrates the longevity of giant associations. Medieval Irish texts call it Seed in Broga, the fairy mound of the Boyne. But older traditions speak of it as the house of the Dagda, a godlike giant. The massive stones, some weighing 10 tons, seemed beyond human capability. The precise astronomical alignment suggested supernatural knowledge. Even today, standing before its entrance, the scale seems designed for beings larger than humans. Comparative mythology reveals how giant stories evolved across cultures. In Slavic mythology, the giant Svyatogor was so large that forests looked like grass beneath him. He carried his wife in a crystal casket on his belt, and mountains formed where he stepped. Like Norse trolls, he belonged to an earlier age and couldn't survive in the human world. He passed his strength to the hero Ilya Muromets before lying down to die, becoming a mountain range. The Basque people, whose language predates Indo-European arrival, have their own giant traditions. The Gentilac were giant builders who created dolmens and stone circles. When Christianity arrived, they threw themselves from cliffs rather than convert. Their last member, Olent Ciro, became a gift bringer like Santa Claus. This transformation from feared giant to benevolent figure parallels changes in troll mythology. Archaeological evidence for catastrophic events might explain shared giant memories. The Storga slide around 6,100 BCE caused massive tsunamis across the North Atlantic. The Black Sea deluge hypothesis suggests flooding around 5,600 BCE. Volcanic eruptions like Lacher Sea around the year 10,900 BCE devastated regions of Europe. Survivors might have attributed these disasters to battles between giants and gods. The scale of destruction would seem beyond natural causes, requiring supernatural explanation. Genetic studies of European populations reveal multiple migration waves. Early hunter-gatherers were largely replaced by Neolithic farmers around 6,000 BCE. These were then partially replaced by steppe peoples around 2,500 BCE. Each group brought its own traditions and monuments. Finding earlier peoples' constructions, later arrivals might attribute them to giants. The real builders were gone, leaving only stones and stories. The transition from Bronze to Iron Age brought technological and mythological changes. Iron tools made stoneworking easier, demystifying megalithic construction. Giants became less necessary to explain ancient monuments. They shifted from builders to obstacles, enemies for heroes to overcome. Yet, they never fully disappeared, retreating to wilderness and margins. They became explanation for the inexplicable, the ancient powers that still moved in darkness. Roman expansion spread Mediterranean giant myths across Europe. Soldiers brought stories of titans and gigantes to Britain and Germania. These merged with local traditions, creating hybrid mythologies. Romano-British texts mention giants like Gog-Magog, combining Celtic and classical elements. Medieval writers, inheriting both traditions, wove them into new narratives. Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain features giants as Britain's original inhabitants. The Indo-European expansion wasn't just migration, but mythological transformation. As peoples moved and merged, their giants merged too. Local landscape features received new explanations while keeping old names. A mountain might be simultaneously a sleeping troll, a buried titan, and a defeated Fomorian. These layered meanings created rich mythological landscapes. Every stone had multiple stories, each true in its own way. Christian writers struggled to reconcile giant traditions with biblical narrative. Genesis mentions the Nephilim, giants before the flood. Medieval scholars identified pagan giants with these biblical giants. This allowed giant stories to persist within Christian framework. Saints replaced heroes in fighting giants, but the giants remained. They became symbols of pagan past, defeated but not destroyed. The deepest roots of European giant mythology reach into the Paleolithic. Cave paintings show human figures beside much larger beings. These might represent gods, spirits, or memories of megafauna. Mammoths, cave bears, and aurochs would seem gigantic to humans. Their bones found in caves might inspire giant legends. The Greeks placed Cyclops myths where they found elephant skulls. The single eye socket actually for the trunk seemed to confirm one-eyed giants. The mists of Ireland hold memories older than written word. In the Labor Gabala Eren, the Book of Invasions, we read of races that shaped the land before humans arrived. The Fir Bolg, whose name means men of bags, were giants who carried earth in leather sacks. They created the fertile plains of Ireland by spreading soil over rocky ground. Archaeological evidence shows extensive land clearing and field systems from the Neolithic period. Perhaps the Firbolg stories preserve memories of these ancient agricultural transformations. The Tuatha De Danann fought the Fomorians at the Second Battle of Mag Tuaird, recorded in manuscripts from the 11th century. The Fomorian king Baelor had an eye that could kill entire armies with its gaze. He was so massive that it took 4 men with hooks to lift his eyelid. His grandson Lu killed him with a sling stone, driving the eye through his skull. The stone's impact was so powerful that it killed 27 Fomorian warriors behind Baelor. This battle took place near Lough Arrow in County Sligo, where standing stones still mark the battlefield. Irish giants weren't always enemies. Finn MacCool, leader of the Fianna, was himself of giant stature. Medieval texts describe him as twice the height of normal men. He could stride from mountain to mountain and throw stones across the sea to Scotland. The giant's Causeway in County Antrim bears his name, Clochan and Ifir in Irish. Legend says Finn built it as a bridge to Scotland to fight the giant Benandonner. When he saw Benandonner's enormous size, Finn retreated and had his wife disguise him as a baby. Benandonner, seeing the size of Finn's infant, fled in terror of what the father must be. Geological science tells us the giant's causeway formed from volcanic activity 60 million years ago. The hexagonal basalt columns resulted from cooling lava flows. But the mathematical precision of these formations seemed impossible without intelligent design. Similar columns exist at Fingal's Cave on the Scottish island of Staffa. The folklore explanation that these are opposite ends of Finn's bridge makes intuitive sense. The columns look deliberately placed, each one fitted to its neighbors with uncanny precision. Welsh traditions speak of different giant races with distinct characteristics. The Siri were mountain giants who piled up cairns as landmarks. Idris Gar, Idris the Giant, gave his name to Cater Idris Mountain. Legend says he sat on the mountain as a chair to study the stars. Those who spend the night on its summit will wake either mad, dead, or as a poet. The mountain's unusual acoustic properties create voices in the wind, as if Idris still mutters his observations. The Welsh Mabinogion, compiled in the 12th and 13th centuries, features numerous giants. Isbadaden Benkar was so enormous that he needed forks to prop open his eyelids. His fortress had a hall large enough to feast hundreds, built from single stone blocks. When the hero Culfuch came seeking his daughter, Isbadaden threw poisoned spears the size of tree trunks. Each spear left craters in the earth that can still be seen near Preseli Hills. These same hills provided the bluestones for Stonehenge's inner circle. Stonehenge itself attracts more giant mythology than any other European monument. Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae, written around 1136, claims giants brought the stones from Africa to Ireland. He calls the monument the Giant's Dance, Chorea Gigantum in Latin. Merlin allegedly moved the stones to Salisbury Plain using engines, mechanical devices lost to time. The sarsen stones, weighing up to 50 tons, seemed impossible for ancient Britons to move. Even today, their transportation from Marlborough Downs challenges archaeological explanation. Recent excavations at Stonehenge reveal its complex history. The site was sacred long before the stones arrived. Cremated remains from 3000 BCE suggest ancestor worship. The bluestones arrived around 2500 BCE, the sarsens around 2400 BCE. Each phase of construction required enormous communal effort. The precision of the astronomical alignments suggests sophisticated knowledge. Medieval people, finding no records of its builders, naturally attributed it to giants. Scottish traditions preserve unique giant lore tied to the landscape. The Highlands have countless stories of the Famharian, the Scottish giants. They lived in the ages before the Scots arrived from Ireland. Ben Vare in Perthshire was home to a giant who kept deer as cattle. His footprints can still be seen in the rock near the summit. The giant's daughter fell in love with a human prince. Their children became the ancestors of Clan Campbell, explaining their unusual height and strength. Fingal's Cave on Staffa demonstrates how geology reinforces mythology. The cathedral-like cavern with its hexagonal pillars creates extraordinary acoustics. Felix Mendelssohn visited in 1829 and composed his Hebrides Overture inspired by its sounds. The cave's Gaelic name is Uam Bin, the melodious cave. Local tradition says Fingal used it as a music hall, the pillars resonating with giant songs. At certain tides, the cave produces sounds resembling deep voices in conversation. Ireland's passage tombs provide the strongest links between giants and death rituals. Newgrange, older than the pyramids, contains a chamber aligned with winter solstice sunrise. The corbelled roof rises to 6 meters, creating space seemingly designed for giant inhabitants. Folklore calls it Brunabuin, the mansion of the Boyne. It was supposedly the palace of Elkmar, a giant who controlled time itself. The Dagda, the good god of Irish mythology, tricked him and took the palace. Inside, carved spirals and diamonds create patterns that seem to move in candlelight. The Hill of Tara, seat of the High Kings of Ireland, has its own giant mythology. The Mound of the Hostages contains a passage tomb from 3000 BC. Local tradition says it was built by giant kings who ruled before human memory. The Lia Fáil, the Stone of Destiny, supposedly roars when touched by the rightful king. It stands 1.8 meters high, modest by megalithic standards, but charged with supernatural power. Medieval texts claim it was brought by the Tuatha De Danann from their northern homeland. Brittany's megalithic monuments rival Ireland's in scale and mystery. The Carnac alignments stretch for kilometers, over 3,000 stones in parallel rows. Local legend says they're a Roman army turned to stone by Saint Corneli. Older stories speak of giants who used them as a garden, planting stones like seeds. The Grand Menhir Brisé, now broken, originally stood 20 meters tall and weighed 330 tons. It's the largest known standing stone attempted in prehistoric Europe. Moving it would require hundreds of people with sophisticated engineering. The broken state of the Grand Menhir might preserve ancient catastrophe. It fell and broke into 4 pieces, possibly during an earthquake. Local tradition says giants were building a lighthouse to guide ships. When they heard of Christianity's arrival, they abandoned their work. The stone fell as they fled, marking the end of the giant age. Archaeologists found evidence it was part of a larger complex, now destroyed. Perhaps it really was a navigation marker, visible from far out at sea. Welsh cromlechs show distinctive building techniques attributed to giants. Pentre Ifan in Pembrokeshire has a capstone weighing 16 tons. It balances on 3 uprights with such precision that it hasn't shifted in 5,000 years. Local folklore says the giant Ifin built it as a table for outdoor feasts. The space beneath could shelter a dozen people, or one reclining giant. Nearby fields contain smaller stones arranged in patterns, supposedly where Ifan's guests sat. Manx folklore from the Isle of Man preserves unique giant traditions. The island's position between Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England created hybrid mythologies. War giants supposedly built the ancient fortifications on South Barrule Mountain. They could wade through the Irish Sea, using it as a bath. The last Fawar was In Fawar Moor, who helped farmers by clearing stones from fields. When he died, grateful humans buried him under Castle Rushen, explaining its massive foundations. Arthurian romances absorbed older giant traditions into chivalric narrative. The Welsh tale, Culhwch and Olwen, possibly from the 11th century, features Arthur fighting giants. He battles the giant of Mont Saint-Michel, who had kidnapped Helena. The giant wore a coat made from the beards of kings he had killed. Arthur's victory proved his divine right to rule, overcoming the old powers. These stories transform giants from builders to obstacles, from creators to monsters. The transition shows changing attitudes toward the prehistoric past. Early medieval texts respect giants as ancient powers deserving caution. Later romances reduce them to challenges for knights to overcome. The shift parallels Christianity's growing confidence in Europe. Giants became symbols of paganism, powerful but ultimately doomed. Yet, they never fully disappeared from Celtic consciousness. They lurked at the margins, in mountains and ruins. Cornwall's giant lore blends Celtic and English traditions uniquely. The giant cormoran built St. Michael's Mount, carrying white granite from the mainland. His wife tried to help by bringing greenstone, which was closer. Cormoran kicked her for disobeying, and she dropped the stone. It remains visible at low tide, Chapel Rock, proof of the story. Jack the Giant Killer supposedly slew Cormoran by digging a pit trap. The giant's heart is buried under the castle, still beating on storm nights. Archaeological excavations often support elements of giant myths. At Loughgur in Ireland, Bronze Age artifacts cluster around sites mentioned in giant legends. The lake supposedly covers a city drowned when its giant king forgot to cover a magic well. Drought sometimes reveals stone foundations beneath the water. These might be crannogs, artificial islands, but folklore insists they're giant palaces. The distinction between mythology and archaeology blurs at such sites. Beyond the Celtic and Nordic worlds, every corner of Europe preserves giant traditions. The Germanic peoples between Scandinavia and the Celtic lands developed their own mythologies. The Hünengräber, giant graves of northern Germany, date from the Neolithic period. These megalithic tombs seem too large for normal human burials. Saxon traditions speak of the Hunnen, a giant race that preceded Germanic settlement. They were neither good nor evil, simply ancient and powerful. The Externstein in the Teutoburg forest embodies Germanic giant mythology. These sandstone pillars, naturally formed but modified by humans, rise 40 meters high. Medieval carvings show biblical scenes, but older traditions speak of giant worship. The Irminsul, the world pillar of Saxon paganism, supposedly stood here. Charlemagne destroyed it in 772 CE during his conversion campaigns. Local folklore maintains that giants carved the chambers and stairs into the rocks. On certain nights, their spirits return to perform ancient rituals. Slavic mythology presents distinctive giant traditions that parallel Western European beliefs. The Russian Byliny, oral epics, speak of Svyatogor, the giant hero. He was so massive that Mother Earth groaned beneath his weight. Forests were like grass to him, and mountains like anthills. Unlike Western giants turned to stone, Svyatogor chose his own end. He found a stone coffin and lay in it, passing his strength to Ilya Muromets. The coffin sealed itself, transforming the giant into a mountain range. Polish folklore speaks of the Stolem, giants who helped humans during the country's founding. They drained swamps, cleared forests, and built the first fortifications. The Wawel dragon's lair in Krakow was supposedly excavated by giants seeking shelter. When Christianity arrived, the Stolem retreated underground. They still live beneath the Carpathian Mountains, their movements causing earthquakes. Miners sometimes hear their voices warning of cave-ins or guiding them to ore veins. Czech traditions center on the giant Bivoy who served Princess Libouche. He could uproot trees with his bare hands and carry boulders like pebbles. The Charles Bridge in Prague supposedly uses foundation stones he placed. Each stone bears marks that locals claim are his fingerprints. The bridge has survived numerous floods that destroyed other structures. Engineers attribute this to excellent medieval construction. But folklore insists it's because Bivoy's giant strength still holds the stones. The Baltic regions preserve unique giant traditions influenced by both Germanic and Slavic cultures. Lithuanian mythology speaks of the Milžinai, giants who lived in the country's many hill forts. These Bronze Age fortifications required moving enormous amounts of earth. Folklore says the Milžinai built them in single nights, competing to create the highest hills. The winner would marry the dawn goddess Ashra. When Christianity came, the giants turned to stone rather than convert. Their bodies became the numerous erratics scattered across Lithuania. Estonian folklore tells of Kalevipoeg, a giant hero whose adventures shaped the landscape. He plowed furrows that became valleys and threw stones that became islands. His bed hollows can be seen in rocks across the country. The Ehalkivi boulder on Hiima Island, weighing 930 tons, was his throwing stone. When he heard his mother had died, he tried to build a bridge to her grave. The stones he dropped in grief became the islands between Estonia and Finland. Moving south, the Alpine regions developed giant mythologies adapted to mountain environments. The wild men of Tyrol were giants covered in hair who knew the locations of precious metals. They would help kind humans but could destroy entire villages when angered. The Lankafell mountain group in the Dolomites, supposedly petrified giants. Their king had demanded a rope woven from moonbeams. When he couldn't pay the moon sprites for their work, they turned his court to stone. The distinctive shape of the peaks does resemble crowned figures in procession. Swiss traditions speak of the Barbagazi, ice giants with frozen beards and enormous feet. They lived above the snow line and rarely descended to human altitudes. Their footprints in snow would melt into perfectly round holes. They helped avalanche victims, but would also trigger slides to punish disrespectful climbers. The Aletsch Glacier supposedly formed when a Barbagazi king died of grief. His frozen tears became the ice that still flows down the mountain. The Iberian Peninsula preserved giant traditions despite centuries of Moorish and Christian influence. The Basque Gentilac were stone-throwing giants who built cromlechs and dolmens. They possessed great wisdom but fled when they saw a glowing cloud, the sign of Christianity. Before leaving, they taught humans agriculture and ironworking. The last gentle Olentzero stayed behind and became a gift bringer. This transformation from feared giant to beloved figure parallels changes elsewhere in Europe. Portuguese folklore speaks of the Muras Encantadas, giant women who guard treasures. They appear as serpents or beautiful maidens depending on the viewer's intent. The Castro de Romares supposedly contains one frozen in stone. She waits for someone pure enough to break her curse. These stories blend Celtic, Roman, and Moorish traditions. The giants become guardians of cultural memory, preserving pre-Christian wisdom. Spanish giant traditions vary dramatically by region. Catalonian folklore features the gigants, giants who dance during festivals. These might preserve memories of actual giant races or Bronze Age stilt walkers. The Picos de Europa mountains supposedly formed when giants competed at stone throwing. Each peak represents a massive boulder hurled by legendary competitors. Extremadura's Las Herdes region has stories of giants who taught beekeeping to humans. They could hear the thoughts of bees and knew which flowers would produce healing honey. Italy's giant mythology blends Etruscan, Greek, Roman, and Celtic influences. The Apennine Mountains supposedly formed from the body of the giant Apenninus. He fell in love with a nymph who fled into the sea. His petrified body stretches down the Italian peninsula, still reaching for his love. Sardinia's Nuraghi, Bronze Age towers, were allegedly built by giants. Over 7,000 of these structures dot the island, some standing 20 meters tall. Local tradition calls them giants' houses, Domus de Janus. The Cyclops myths of Sicily preserve memories of elephant skulls found in caves. The large nasal cavity looked like a single eye socket to ancient observers. Mount Etna supposedly imprisons the Cyclops, who forged Zeus's thunderbolts. His forge work causes the volcanic eruptions. The hexagonal basalt columns of the Gol del Alcantara are his abandoned projects. Similar to Ireland's Giant's Causeway, they suggest deliberate construction. Greece itself, despite well-documented mythology, has folk traditions about giants that differ from classical texts. The Carites were giants who protected infant Zeus by dancing and clashing their shields. Their footsteps created the mountain valleys of Crete. Modern Crete preserves stories of giants unmentioned in ancient sources. The Digenis Acritas, a medieval Greek epic, features a hero of giant stature. He could leap across the Euphrates and wrestle lions bare-handed. These stories blend Byzantine, Arab, and ancient Greek traditions. The transformation of giants under Christianity followed consistent patterns across Europe. Early Christian writers acknowledged giants as historical beings, the Nephilim of Genesis. Medieval theologians debated whether giants had souls and could achieve salvation. Saints often battled giants, replacing pagan heroes in traditional narratives. Saint Christopher was sometimes depicted as a giant who served Christ. This allowed giant traditions to persist within Christian framework. The medieval period saw giants become symbols of the 7 deadly sins. Pride especially was associated with gigantic stature. Mystery plays featured giants as opponents of biblical heroes. Yet positive giant traditions persisted in folk culture. Giants appeared as civic symbols, protecting cities and regions. The gigantes y cabezudos, giants and big heads, still parade in Spanish festivals. Belgium's Ommegang features giants representing historical and mythical figures. Archaeological discoveries continue to inform giant mythologies. The discovery of mammoth bones in European caves created new giant legends. Medieval people finding fossilized footprints assumed they belonged to giants. The Bern giant, assembled from mammoth bones in 1577, was displayed as proof of biblical giants. Even when recognized as animal bones, they reinforced beliefs in a primordial age of giants. The earth itself seemed to preserve evidence of these ancient beings. Mining traditions across Europe consistently mention giants. German Bergmenschen, mine spirits, were sometimes described as diminished giants. They knew the locations of ore because they had placed it there in ancient times. Welsh Coblynau knocked on mine walls to guide or warn miners. These beings bridged the gap between giants and dwarves. Perhaps they represent cultural memories of different mining techniques or populations. The distribution of megalithic monuments correlates remarkably with giant traditions. Atlantic Europe, from Portugal to Scandinavia, has both the most megaliths and the richest giant folklore. This arc follows ancient maritime trade routes. Perhaps the monument builders really did share cultural traditions about giants. Or perhaps later peoples, finding similar monuments, created similar explanations. The truth likely combines both possibilities. As morning mist rises from Scottish moors, the standing stones of Callanish emerge like awakening giants. 5,000 years after their placement, they still evoke the same awe that created the first giant myths. We now know these monuments were built by human hands through ingenuity and enormous collective effort. Yet, knowing this doesn't diminish their power. If anything, it deepens the mystery. What compelled ancient peoples to move mountains stone by stone? What vision drove communities to labor for generations on monuments they might never see completed? The giant myths offer an answer that transcends archaeological explanation. These stones connect us to powers greater than individual human life. Whether we call them giants, ancestors, or collective human achievement, they represent transcendence. From Norway's Troll Mountains to Ireland's giant causeways, Europe's landscape tells a consistent story. There was an age before our age, when beings of enormous power shaped the earth. They built impossible structures, moved immovable stones, and left their marks in rock and memory. When the New Age dawned, whether with Christianity or simply changing times, they departed. But they didn't vanish. They transformed into the landscape itself. Modern geology explains the hexagonal columns, the balanced erratics, the mountain shapes that look like sleeping giants. But explanation and meaning are different things. The stories our ancestors told about these features reveal how they understood their place in the cosmos. They lived in a world still touched by primordial forces, where the boundary between stone and flesh could blur. In our rush to demythologize the past, we risk losing this sense of living landscape. The giants and trolls of European mythology were never simply monsters or obstacles. They were memory keepers, preserving knowledge of deep time and geological force. They reminded humans that we are recent arrivals in an ancient world. The stones they placed or became continue standing, patient and enduring. While our cities rise and fall, the megaliths remain. Perhaps this is why giant myths persist even in our scientific age. We still feel small before Stonehenge's trilithons or Karnak's endless rows. We still see faces in mountain profiles and hear voices in cave acoustics. The giants haven't left. They've simply become more subtle. They reveal themselves to those who know how to look. In the mathematical precision of basalt columns, in the impossible balance of a dolmen's capstone, in the astronomical alignments no primitive culture should have achieved. Every standing stone in Europe carries multiple stories, accumulated over millennia like geological layers. A Neolithic tomb becomes a giant's house, becomes a fairy mound, becomes a tourist attraction. Each interpretation adds meaning without erasing what came before. The stones absorb these stories and reflect them back, mirrors of cultural memory. They are simultaneously natural formations, ancient monuments, and living myths. Today, as we face our own global transformations, the giant myths offer unexpected relevance. They speak of ages ending and beginning, of old powers giving way to new. They remind us that landscape itself is memory, holding stories we've forgotten we knew. The trolls turned to stone at dawn are still waiting in Norway's peaks. The giants who built Ireland's cromlechs still support their massive capstones. These aren't fantasies, but different ways of understanding endurance and transformation. As you walk among Europe's ancient stones, consider what giants mean in our modern world. Are they simply primitive explanations for geological phenomena? Or do they encode deeper truths about human relationship with landscape and time? The stone circles and dolmens stand as bridges between worlds, connecting us to ancestors who saw giants in every mountain. Their stories remind us that we too are part of this ancient dialogue, adding our own layer of meaning to stones that have stood for 5,000 years. The giants haven't vanished. They've simply been waiting, patient as stone, for those who still know how to see them.